Shalom chaverim, hello friends. I'm Rabbi Stern, and welcome to another video. Today is July 4th. I'm wearing my President's Volunteer Service Award that I won a few years ago, and I'm just feeling very patriotic today. So we're going to review a video about what role Jews played in the Revolutionary War. We're going to find out all about the role Jews played in setting up this great country, America. Let's get started. All right, this is Unpacked's video. A Jew saved the American Revolution? They phrase it like a question, so we'll find out whether a Jew did save the American Revolution.
Paul Revere, George Washington, Alexander Hamilton, Haym Soloman? Chances are you've heard of those first three names. They're the heroes of the American Revolution. But few people have heard of that last guy with the Jewish-sounding last name. But without Haym Soloman, the rebels might not have won the American Revolution. So until he gets a Hamilton-style musical of his own, I'm here to shine a light on the man who outwitted the British, escaped a death sentence, and dedicated everything to the revolutionary cause. So how did this Jewish immigrant change the course of American history?
The Jew who financed the American Revolution, Haym Soloman, is indeed not a name enough people know about.
18th century Poland wasn't the friendliest place for a Jew, but Haym Soloman's family was no stranger to persecution. His ancestors had been expelled from Portugal in the late 15th century. Nearly 300 years later, they kept their traditions alive, a tiny pocket of Sephardic culture amid an Ashkenazi community. But the little town of Lezhno wasn't big enough for Haym Soloman's aspirations, and by the age of 20, he was traveling Western Europe, picking up the language and business skills that would eventually save his life. We don't know why Solomon came to the United States, or even exactly when he arrived, but we do know that when he disembarked in New York City sometime in the 1770s, he was walking straight into a revolution. The 13 British colonies of the so-called New World were seething, and their colonists were being treated like Britain's cash cows. Colonists and British soldiers had been sniping at each other since 1770, and by 75, the colony seemed about to explode. The 2,500 Jews living in the British colonies watched tensions spiral with both interest and alarm. War tends to be rough on stateless minorities, and the Jews were nothing if not a minority among the 2.5 million other.
Most of the time when war breaks out, it's a very bad time for Jews. Jews get scapegoated for various things, from war profiteering to blood libels. Even, in fact, in our own history here in the United States, General Ulysses S. Grant, who is a hero of the United States, of course, did, in fact, issue an order to expel all Jews from the Tennessee territory that he was in charge of as its military governor and general in charge of the area. And it took Lincoln, actually, to say, no, this is crazy, you can't do this. And he even took heat for it during his election campaign. Now, he claims it was a misunderstanding. There's some evidence to support that. Jonathan Sarna has a great book called When Grant Expelled the Jews. So if you're interested more in that topic, please take a look at that book.
Colonists. But the winds of change were blowing, and even though the British had been more or less tolerant, the rebels fomenting a revolution were offering something much more interesting than mere tolerance. They were offering liberty. This was huge. Remember, until that moment, most of the world, including of course the Jews, lived under an all-powerful ruler, a king who could protect you one day and turn on you the next.
It's good to be the king.
Mel Brooks, it's good to be the king. And while that was true for most of history, it's also true that America granting citizenship to people of all religions, including Jewish people, made America one of the first countries in the world to emancipate, to allow its Jews to participate in the blessings of freedom and citizenship, among the first countries in the world to do so. And that's crazy that it took until the late 18th century for that to happen. Yet another reason why Jewish people are extremely grateful for the United States of America.
No matter how well connected, a Jew was always at risk with a limited number of plays when dealing with persecution. Convert, run, or die. But there was a spark in the air. The furious energy of rebels who were tired of living under the thumb of an absolute ruler, and who would do whatever it took to shake him off. The Jewish community was no longer caught between the no-win choices of convert, flee, or die. The rebels offered another option: liberty or death. It was a thrilling, tempting new paradigm. So while some Jews sided with the British during the Revolutionary War, Haym Soloman wasn't one of them. Almost as soon as he landed in the colonies, Solomon threw his lot in with the rebels. King George represented an old world legacy of authority and persecution. Meanwhile, the rebels fought for freedom and natural rights, a highly appealing concept to a man who spent his life as a second-class citizen. The colonies were a clean slate.
Absolutely.
Who knew? Maybe these rebels would succeed in building a new world where anyone, even a Jew, could pursue life and liberty without fear. But on the eve of war in 1776, things weren't looking good for the rebels. The under-equipped rebel army and the world's most powerful empire were gearing up for a showdown. No one could have predicted how this was going to end. But Solomon didn't care. He was all in on the revolution. And while he had started his career in the Americas as a liquor distiller, he soon switched over to supplying the rebel army with all sorts of necessary goods, which...
This isn't the only time Jews have helped a country fight forces of authoritarianism, and I'm not talking about World War II. Just a couple years after this, when Napoleon is conquering across Europe, when it's finally put an end to, it's Jewish suppliers and financiers who really make it possible for the European forces. Again, I don't want to call them free European forces. They were still represented by monarchies. But this force led by Britain that was meant to liberate most of Europe and end the reign of Napoleon. Now, Jews have a complicated relationship with Napoleon. Napoleon helped make sure that Jews could be citizens of France. And yet, at the same time, it's worth noting that Napoleon was obviously someone who dreamed of remaking Europe in his image. And we tend to be on the side of people who want to exercise their natural liberty.
Would have been a perfectly decent way to make money, except for two things. One, the Patriot Army had no money, a fact we'll return to later. More pressingly, the British authorities really didn't appreciate Solomon's attachment to the Revolutionary Army, which is how Solomon found himself under arrest, confined to a military prison in New York on charges of being a spy. Yikes. But like the biblical Joseph, another Hebrew who turned prison into an opportunity, Solomon was clever. With his fluent command of 7 languages, he made an excellent interpreter. So rather than kill him or let him rot in prison, the British instead hired Solomon to work for them. See, the Brits had hired 30,000 German mercenaries to fight against the colonists, which sounds good in theory, except for the fact that the two didn't share a language. But Solomon did. With his fluency in German, not to mention English, French, Italian, Polish, Spanish, and Russian, he acted as an intermediary between the Germans and the Brits. But behind the scenes, he was still quietly serving the revolutionary cause, helping captured rebels escape British custody and even converting some German mercenaries to the Patriot side. Solomon's language skills had saved him once, but his luck ran out in 1778 when the Brits arrested him a second time, again on charges of espionage. This time, they were a lot less lenient. His sentence? Death. No one's 100% sure how he escaped, but escape he did, fleeing under the cover of darkness to Philadelphia, leaving behind his business, his family, his entire net worth. Now he had to start over. He appealed to the Continental Congress for a loan. They ignored him. So Solomon was forced to do what he did best: persevere, make something out of nothing, succeed against all odds. Within 3 years of his arrival in Philadelphia, he'd launched a successful brokerage business. And though the Continental Congress had ignored him once before, he nonetheless offered his services to the newly minted Superintendent of Finance. But there were plenty of brokers in Philadelphia. What made Solomon different? Well, a few things. First of all, his language skills came in handy yet again, as he negotiated deals with European parties, including the French army troops who had massed in Philadelphia to resist the British. But more importantly, without Solomon's contribution, the Continental Congress would have been flat broke. They desperately needed the money from the deals he brokered for them. Turns out, you need more than high-minded ideals to take on the world's most powerful empire.
And famously, as most American students learn in public school, the Continental money was so worthless that Washington's troops would burn it for warmth before they'd think of spending it, because it had basically no value for much of the war. It's really important that he was able to keep this equipment and these troops paid and all this stuff coming in and working so that the army could do Armies are necessary to win wars, obviously, but as we see all the time throughout history, logistics are also a large part of winning wars and finding out who's going to pay for it.
A revolution runs on cold, hard cash.
Show me the money.
So the Continental Congress made the understandable, but very financially unwise decision to simply print more money.
Show me the money!
This is
Bad
what I'm talking
move.
about.
Because as any armchair economist will tell you, printing more
That's
money
me, I'm
just
an
results
armchair
in inflation.
economist.
The rebel government had basically just printed monopoly money.
Thanks for the free parking.
Few vendors accepted this nearly worthless paper money.
Activist. Yes.
Unfortunately for the Patriots, war is expensive. Soldiers needed food, training, a place to camp, uniforms, salaries so their families could eat. And the longer that the rebel army went without those things, the angrier and more unruly they became. Rebel forces were on the brink of mutiny when their commander, some guy named George Washington, instructed his superintendent of finance to send for Haym Soloman. He knew Solomon was the only man in the colonies who could come up with the $20,000 he needed to win the decisive final battle of the American Revolution.
The Battle of Yorktown.
Solomon came through, and some reports say that he even used some of his personal wealth to fund the revolutionary cause. With that $20,000, Washington and his army were able to move on Yorktown. And then, the world turned upside down. That was the song on everyone's lips as the rebel army defeated the British once and for all. They were no longer rebels, they were Americans. But their new nation was a hot mess. America simply had no money. And Solomon wasn't gonna let that stand. He was willing to sacrifice everything to turn America into the haven that the original patriots had promised. As the official broker of the Office of Finance, he saw firsthand how close the nation had come to total collapse. He worked tirelessly to finance the government, even contributing from his own pocket, all while pursuing another cause dear to his heart, the advancement of the Jewish community. His contributions went beyond the financial. True, he helped fund a new synagogue in Philadelphia, which still stands today, but he also campaigned for the religious freedom that he had been promised. You see, only Christians were allowed in the Pennsylvania state legislature. Solomon was having none of that.
Oh no.
It's true. Originally, some states did still have laws on the books from pre-America days that did not enfranchise Jews. And it would take until the Constitution goes into effect to nullify some of that. But I'm glad to hear Haym Soloman, this great patriot, also helped his fellow Jews to become both American and to be able to maintain their tradition as Jews.
He didn't.
With other members of the Jewish community, he petitioned Pennsylvania's Board of Censors, reminding them of the massive role he and other Jews had played in securing American freedom. And the campaign worked. The censors removed the religious clause from the state constitution, guaranteeing Pennsylvania's religious liberties. Sadly, Solomon didn't live long enough to fully enjoy the religious liberty he'd fought for. He died of tuberculosis at the age of 44, leaving behind a wife, 4 children, and significant debt.
What happened to all that money?
Solomon had been so confident in his newborn country's ability to sustain itself that he'd invested most of his fortune in government securities. Securities worth very little. It was a bitter ending to a life spent in service to the revolutionary ideal. And to add insult to injury, few people even know Solomon's name today. Until now, right? Here's the craziest part though. For all his talents and contributions to the American cause, Solomon wasn't unique. He was one of a number of Jews who dedicated themselves fully to their newly formed homeland. Others, like Rabbi Gershom Mendes Seixas, used their position in the Jewish community to spread awareness and support for the revolution. And others, like Haym Soloman or Jonas Phillips, poured their fortunes into the American cause. Despite their tiny numbers, the Jews of colonial America were well equipped to help their new nation. They were immigrants or refugees or the children of refugees. And that's what enabled them to dedicate themselves to the revolution. They wanted to believe in freedom and liberty.
Absolutely. It's not surprising to me that all of these Jews were fierce patriots. How could any Jewish person think of siding with a monarchy and a king that had always subjugated people over this promise of liberty? Maybe it wouldn't be immediate, but they had faith that something better would come and became some of America's fiercest patriots. Jews today are still some of America's fiercest patriots, and I'm glad to celebrate that fact with you on July 4th.
But they also carried the legacy of a people kicked out of their homes at a moment's notice. So they prioritized the kind of wealth that no one could take away. Education, languages, connections to other Jewish communities across the world. That is the Jewish legacy.
a great video by Unpacked. They always do great stuff on Jewish topics. And once again, I'm just so glad to be able to share this July 4th with you here by talking about Haym Soloman and many Jews who helped make America's revolutionary ideals a reality. Please remember to like this video, subscribe to my channel, and hit the notification bell so you always know when the next video is coming. And happy July 4th.